Is there a medic? A sergeant screamed through the chaos of gunfire. A woman in standard fatigues raised her hand. I'm a nurse. The commander glanced at her dismissively. We need actual combat medics. 20 minutes later, 3 soldiers lay bleeding out. She pushed through the squad, grabbed a medical kit, and moved with lightning precision. Someone gasped, "Wait, she's from the 10th Combat Support Hospital." The ghost medics. Meet Elena Vasquez, 42 years old, a military nurse who served 4 tours across Afghanistan and Iraq. Her steady hands had saved countless lives in the most horrific conditions imaginable, though few in her new unit bothered to notice. She had transferred to the 75th Ranger Battalion as support staff 3 months ago, her transfer papers simply listing her as medical support personnel. The Rangers, America's elite light infantry, had little use for what they considered just a nurse. Elena's dark eyes held that battlefield calm that came only from seeing the worst humanity could offer and still finding the courage to heal. Her medical kit, not standard issue, sat in her quarters, wrapped in canvas that had traveled through war zones from Fallujah to Kandahar. Every item inside had been personally selected, tested under fire, and maintained with religious precision. On a humid morning in the Philippines, where the unit had deployed for a joint training exercise with local forces, the radio in the command center crackled with panic. A village 20 miles north had been attacked by insurgents. Multiple casualties, including American advisors. The local medical facilities had been specifically targeted first, leaving no immediate care for the wounded. Elena knew that region intimately. She had spent 6 months there with Doctors Without Borders before rejoining the military, learning every path through the dense jungle, every local remedy when supplies ran low, every dialect needed to communicate with frightened villagers. She had treated both insurgents and civilians in makeshift clinics when the fighting grew too intense for formal medical facilities. She walked into the mission briefing room, her worn combat boots making barely a sound on the polished floor. The room buzzed with activity, tactical displays, satellite imagery, communication specialists coordinating with headquarters. Captain Rodriguez was assembling a quick reaction force, selecting team members based on combat experience and specialty. Elena approached calmly, professionally. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer as medical support. I've worked in that village before. I know the terrain and the local medical resources." Lieutenant Parker, the team's designated medical officer, looked up from his tablet with barely concealed amusement. "Thanks for the offer, Vasquez, but this isn't a hospital ward. We're dealing with combat trauma in hostile territory. We need someone who can work under fire." She stood her ground. "With respect, Lieutenant, I've treated gunshot wounds during active firefights. I've performed emergency surgery in villages while they were being mortared." Captain Rodriguez glanced between them, checking his watch. They were already behind schedule. "What's your combat qualification, Vasquez?" "Basic medical support training, sir. But my field experience. We can't risk sending in support staff without advanced tactical training." Rodriguez cut her off. "Parker's our medic. He's been through the combat medical course and has 3 years with the Rangers." Parker was 28, fresh from advanced training at Fort Sam Houston, with 1 deployment under his belt. His medical kit contained state-of-the-art equipment, portable ultrasound, advanced hemostatic agents, digital vital monitors, everything modern military medicine could provide. His uniform bore the tabs and patches that commanded instant respect in the special operations community. "No offense, ma'am," Parker said, not bothering to hide his condescension, "but we need people who can handle themselves when bullets start. Flying, this isn't like a field hospital with security perimeters." Elena said nothing. In her mind flashed images of performing triage while tracers cracked overhead, of stitching arteries closed by flashlight because generator power was needed for more critical patients, of carrying wounded soldiers through minefields because waiting meant certain death. But her personnel file listed her only as nursing staff, and her real experience was buried under classified mission reports that Rodriguez didn't have clearance to access. "I understand, sir," she said quietly, stepping back. Rodriguez gave her a sympathetic but dismissive nod. "We appreciate your willingness, Vasquez. Maybe next time." As the team continued preparations, Elena returned to her quarters. Against direct orders, she packed her personal medical kit anyway, the one that had saved lives when all modern equipment failed. Inside were instruments most military medics had never seen used in the field, centuries-old techniques adapted for modern warfare, tools modified for maximum efficiency with minimal resources, emergency medications and concentrations not taught in standard courses. The Quick Reaction Force was short-handed. 2 of their medics were down with dengue fever, and 1 was on leave. Against regulations but with little choice, the captain assigned Elena as a last-minute addition for basic medical support only. Her instructions were clear: stay back, follow Parker's lead, provide basic assistance when asked, and otherwise stay out of the way. As the helicopters lifted off, Elena sat quietly in the back, ignored by the Rangers checking weapons and reviewing tactical information. They were professional, focused, elite soldiers who had earned their place through brutal selection courses and combat experience. Each carried specialized equipment worth thousands of dollars: night vision, encrypted communications, advanced weaponry. What could a nurse possibly contribute to this level of tactical expertise? None of them knew what Elena carried in her mind and hands. None of them understood what she had learned in places where high-tech equipment failed and human skill was the only thing standing between life and death. None of them had performed emergency amputations with a Leatherman tool and dental floss when medical supplies ran out. None had delivered babies during firefights or treated children suffering from chemical weapons exposure while wearing a gas mask. None had looked into the eyes of a dying teenager and promised him he would live, then fought against impossible odds to keep that promise. As the helicopters approached the drop zone, Elena gazed down at the jungle canopy below. Smoke rose from several locations around the village. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets, reporting heavy small arms fire in the target area. The landing zone was hot. In the sweltering heat of the Philippine jungle, the Rangers moved with practiced precision. Elena stayed in the middle of the formation as instructed, alert but unobtrusive. The sounds of sporadic gunfire echoed through the trees as they approached the village outskirts. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The village medical clinic had been destroyed, its supplies looted or burned. Several bodies lay in the central area, some civilians, some insurgents, some impossible to identify. The American advisors had taken refuge in a small concrete building, 2 of them critically wounded. Elena heard Parker curse under his breath as they assessed the situation. "Jesus, this is worse than the report said. We've got at least 12 critical casualties here." The Rangers secured the perimeter while Parker began triage, moving from victim to victim with his digital assessment tools, marking each with color-coded indicators for evacuation priority. Elena watched silently as he worked, noticing small details his hurried assessment missed: the slight asymmetry in a chest wound that suggested tension pneumothorax, the specific shade of gray in a man's lips indicating cyanosis rather than just shock. Captain Rodriguez coordinated with headquarters for emergency evacuation, but the news wasn't good. Medevac is delayed at least 90 minutes. Weather system moving in, and they're taking fire at their staging area. 90 minutes. Elena knew what that meant. For at least 3 of the victims, that was about 80 minutes too long. Parker worked efficiently, professionally, his training evident in every movement. But Elena could see the growing panic behind his eyes as he realized the scale of the situation exceeded his experience. His modern equipment worked perfectly, giving precise readings and diagnostics, but he hesitated when facing multiple critical patients simultaneously. When the first advisor, Sergeant Mills, began convulsing violently, blood pouring from a shrapnel wound in his abdomen, Parker froze momentarily. His training had covered seizures, had covered hemorrhaging, had covered shock, but not all simultaneously in a patient while 9 others needed immediate attention. "His BP is crashing," Parker called out, fumbling with his medical kit. "I need another set of hands here." The other Rangers were securing the perimeter or treating walking wounded. No one was available. Elena stepped forward. "I can help." Parker barely glanced up. "Just apply pressure here while I get the hemostatic agent ready." Elena saw immediately that hemostatic agents wouldn't help. The bleeding was internal, extensive, and the convulsions were neurological, not just from blood loss. Every second of delay meant brain damage. For 15 agonizing minutes, she watched Parker apply textbook procedures that weren't working. His hands, steady during training exercises, trembled slightly under the pressure of real combat medicine with lives immediately at stake. His expensive equipment gave perfect readings of vital signs that continued to deteriorate despite his interventions. When Mills stopped breathing, Parker's composure finally broke. "I can't get an airway. His throat's too swollen from the allergic reaction to something. None of the standard intubation equipment will fit." 2 more casualties began deteriorating simultaneously. A young Filipino woman with a chest wound started coughing blood. An elderly man with severe burns lost consciousness. Parker looked between them, indecision plain on his face, his training insufficient for this level of mass casualty. "Damn it! We're losing them all." His voice cracked with stress. "Rodriguez, I need to know when that medevac is coming." Elena couldn't wait any longer. Every moment meant another life slipping away. She moved to Mill's side, her voice calm but commanding. "I need to take over now, or he dies in the next 2 minutes." Parker started to object, but Rodriguez, seeing the situation deteriorating, gave a quick nod. "Do what you need to do, Vasquez." Elena opened her personal medical kit for the first time, revealing contents that made Parker step back in surprise. Inside were instruments arranged with military precision, each with a purpose. That couldn't be found in any manual. She pulled out a curved metal tube with modifications he didn't recognize. "This is a retrograde intubation device," she explained as her hands moved with astonishing speed. "It's been used in field hospitals in Africa when standard equipment fails." Without hesitation, she inserted it through a route Parker hadn't been taught, bypassing the swollen tissues that had blocked his attempts. Immediately, Mill's oxygen levels began to stabilize. Elena moved to the Filipino woman next, diagnosing a tension pneumothorax that Parker had missed. From her kit came a special needle, longer and more flexible than standard issue. "Hold her shoulders," she instructed a nearby ranger. With precision that came from hundreds of similar procedures, she released the trapped air from the woman's chest cavity. The relief was immediate. Color returned to the woman's lips as she gasped. In a full breath. For the burn victim, Elena pulled out what looked like ordinary honey, but was actually a specialized burn treatment she had learned from a doctor in Kandahar. "This prevents infection and promotes healing better than our synthetic alternatives," she explained while applying it with gloved hands. Parker stood watching in stunned silence as Elena moved from patient to patient. Her methods weren't in any manual he'd studied, her techniques not taught in any military course he'd attended. Yet each intervention worked with startling effectiveness. "Where did you learn to do that?" he finally asked as she stabilized a child with a head wound using a technique he'd never seen. Elena didn't look up from her work. 10th Combat Support Hospital. Then classified deployments with special operations. "But you're he stopped himself. "Nurse?" She finally met his eyes. "That's what my transfer papers say." Before he could respond, gunfire erupted nearby. The insurgents had regrouped and were making another push toward the village. The Rangers returned fire, creating a defensive perimeter around the medical treatment area. "We need to move these patients now," Rodriguez shouted. "Hostile force is larger than we thought." Moving critical patients through jungle terrain. Under fire was a nightmare scenario, one that Parker had only trained for in controlled exercises. The color drained from his face as he calculated the impossibility of the task. Elena immediately took charge of the medical evacuation. "We need 4 stretchers for the critical cases. The walking wounded can support each other. The burn victim needs to be carried in a seated position to keep his airways clear." Her instructions came with the authority of someone who had coordinated similar evacuations under even worse conditions. To Parker's surprise, Rodriguez deferred to her without question, implementing her evacuation plan immediately. As they prepared to move, a mortar round exploded at the edge of the village, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. Parker took cover instinctively, but Elena didn't flinch. She threw herself over Mill's body, shielding him from debris while continuing to monitor his breathing. When a second explosion knocked out their radio communications, Elena pulled a small signal mirror from her pocket. Using techniques developed before satellite phones existed, she established communication with the helicopter pilot circling above, coordinating a new extraction point with reflected sunlight in a pattern only military pilots would recognize. During the grueling evacuation through dense jungle, Elena maintained treatment on the move, adjusting IVs while walking over rough terrain, rechecking bandages as they navigated steep inclines, all while insurgent forces pursued them. When Mills developed a dangerous heart arrhythmia, she stabilized him using pressure points and medications administered in sequences Parker had never seen. At one point, they became separated from 2 Rangers who were carrying the Filipino woman. Elena handed her primary patient to Parker with clear instructions, then disappeared into the jungle alone. 20 minutes later, she returned with both Rangers and their patient, having navigated through enemy territory using tracking skills she'd learned from tribal doctors in Afghanistan. When they finally reached the extraction point, the medevac helicopter was still 30 minutes out. Elena established a defensive treatment position, using terrain features to protect the wounded from both gunfire and the elements, creating 4 poles from bamboo, using large leaves as additional compression. Bandages when supplies ran low. As insurgent forces closed in on their position, a firefight erupted around the treatment area. Elena continued working on Mills, whose condition had deteriorated again, while bullets struck trees just feet away. When a grenade landed near the wounded, she covered them with her body, sustaining shrapnel wounds to her back, but never stopping. Treatment. Parker, now working alongside her instead of directing her, finally asked the question that had been building since she first opened her kit. "Who are you really, Vasquez?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She was focused on Mills, whose pulse had become erratic again. Only after stabilizing him did she look up at Parker, fatigue evident in her eyes, but her hands still perfectly steady. "10th CSH was my official assignment," she said quietly. "But I spent most of my deployments attached to units that don't exist on paper. When regular medical support couldn't reach wounded operators, they sent people like me." Recognition dawned on Parker's face. "You're from the Ghost Medics." "I thought that was just a rumor," Elena shrugged. "That's not what we called ourselves. But yes, we went where conventional medical support couldn't, treated patients that couldn't be evacuated, used techniques that weren't in any manual because the situations we faced weren't in any training scenario." Before Parker could respond, Rodriguez called out that the medevac was 2 minutes out. As they prepared the patients for extraction, Elena gave Parker specific instructions for each casualty, information to relay to the hospital staff about treatments she'd administered that wouldn't be familiar to conventional medical personnel. The helicopter descended through sporadic enemy fire, touching down just long enough to load the wounded. As Mills was being secured, he regained consciousness briefly, his eyes focusing on Elena. "You're the one who saved me," he whispered. Recognition in his pain-clouded eyes. "I heard you when I was out. You kept talking to me." Elena squeezed his hand. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." As the helicopter lifted off with all the wounded, except 2 walk-in cases who would evacuate with the ground force, Rodriguez gathered his team for extraction. The mission had been accomplished. All survivors recovered. All wounded stabilized for transport. But the cost had been high. 3 Rangers had sustained injuries during the evacuation, and Elena's back was bleeding through her uniform from the shrapnel wounds. Parker approached her as she repacked her medical kit, his earlier arrogance replaced with genuine respect. "You should get on the next medevac. Those wounds need treatment." Elena shook her head. "I've had worse. The team needs medical support. For extraction, I'll manage." Rodriguez joined them, his expression grim but appreciative. "Vasquez, I don't know what strings got pulled to have you assigned as nursing staff to my unit, but I'm damn glad they did. I've never seen anyone work like that under fire." Elena said nothing, but the captain wasn't finished. "When we get back to base, I want your real file unsealed. Whatever unit you're actually from, whatever your actual qualification is, I want it recognized properly in my command." For the first time, Elena showed surprise. "Sir, those files are classified." "Above your clearance level," Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Not anymore. I just watched you save 12 lives using techniques I've never seen, while taking enemy fire without flinching. That earns you the right to your real identity in my unit." During the helicopter flight back to base, Elena maintained her calm, professional demeanor despite the pain from her shrapnel wounds. The Rangers, who had dismissed her only hours earlier, now watched her with newfound respect as she continued to monitor the 2 remaining wounded soldiers without complaint. As the helicopter touched down at the forward operating base, medical staff rushed forward with stretchers for the injured Rangers. Parker stepped forward, gesturing to Elena. "She needs treatment too. Shrapnel wounds to the back and possible concussion." Elena shook her head. "The others first." "I can wait." A medical officer approached, clipboard in hand. "We need a report on the field treatments administered. Were you the acting combat medic?" Before Parker could speak, Rodriguez interrupted. "This is Elena Vasquez. She performed advanced combat medicine under direct enemy fire and saved 12 lives today, and she needs treatment before debriefing." The medical officer looked surprised, glancing down at his personnel list. "Vasquez, you're listed here as nursing support staff." Elena finally allowed herself to sit down, the adrenaline that had carried her through the mission beginning to fade. "That's what my transfer papers say." Rodriguez placed a hand on her shoulder. "Get checked out, Vasquez. That's an order. We'll sort out the paperwork later." As medical staff led her away, Elena caught Parker watching her with an expression that had transformed from condescension to something approaching awe. The younger medic gave her a respectful nod before turning to help with the other casualties. Inside the medical tent, Dr. Melissa Chun worked efficiently to remove shrapnel fragments from Elena's back. "These wounds should have been treated immediately. You're lucky there's no sign of infection yet." Elena stared straight ahead, barely wincing as metal fragments clinked into a steel basin. Others needed treatment more urgently. Dr. Chun paused, studying Elena's stoic expression. "You're not just nursing staff, are you? These scars. You've been through this before." Elena's back told its own story. Older scars from previous injuries layered beneath the fresh wounds. Burns from an IED in Fallujah. A jagged line where a piece of helicopter had pierced her shoulder during a crash landing near Kandahar. Smaller marks from countless other incidents that had never made it into any official report. "I go where I'm needed," Elena replied simply. Dr. Chun finished. removing the last fragment, then began cleaning the wounds. The base commander wants to speak with you as soon as you're patched up. Apparently there's been some confusion about your service record. Elena closed her eyes briefly. She had hoped to avoid this conversation. Her transfer to this unit had been deliberately low profile, a favor called in by an old commander who thought she deserved a quieter assignment after years of classified operations. The paperwork had been simplified, her background condensed to nursing support, to avoid complicated questions about missions that officially never happened. "There's no confusion," Elena said quietly. "My record says exactly what someone wanted it to say." After being bandaged and cleared by Dr. Chun, Elena reported to the command center as ordered. The small, air-conditioned room was a stark contrast to the jungle heat and chaos of the village. Colonel James Matthews, the base commander, sat behind a desk reviewing documents on his tablet. Captain Rodriguez stood nearby, along with a man Elena didn't recognize wearing civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of military intelligence. "Specialist Vasquez," Matthews began, then paused, looking up from his tablet with a frown. "Or should I say Master Sergeant Vasquez?" The civilian stepped forward. "It's actually Chief Warrant Officer Vasquez, if we're being accurate." He extended his hand. "Thomas Reed, Defense Intelligence Agency. We've had quite a time sorting out who you actually are." Elena remained expressionless. "My transfer papers list me as a specialist, sir." Colonel Matthews tapped his tablet. "Yes, they do. They also omit approximately 80% of your service record, including 3 Silver Stars, a Distinguished Service Cross, and multiple Purple Hearts." He looked up at her. "Would you care to explain why one of the most decorated combat medics in recent military history is serving as nursing support in my command without my knowledge?" Elena shifted her weight slightly, the only indication of her discomfort. "After my last deployment, I requested a transfer to a support role. My former commander facilitated the paperwork. He thought," she hesitated, "he thought I'd seen enough combat." Reed nodded. "Colonel Westmoreland. He called me about an hour ago, after Captain Rodriguez started making inquiries. He confirmed you were part of a classified medical unit attached to Special Operations. The Ghost Medics, as they were unofficially known." "We never called ourselves that," Elena said, the same response she'd given Parker. "The people you saved did," Reed replied. "Operators extracted from behind enemy lines, wounded soldiers in overrun positions, pilots downed in hostile territory. Your unit went in when conventional medevac couldn't, stayed when others had to pull out." He glanced at a file in his hand. "There are at least 37 confirmed accounts of soldiers who claim they owe their lives specifically to you." Colonel Matthews leaned forward. "Why hide this record, Chief Warrant Officer? These are accomplishments most soldiers would be proud to acknowledge." Elena met his gaze steadily. "Because the soldiers I couldn't save haunt me more than any pride I might take in those I did, sir. Because after 12 years of pulling broken bodies from burning vehicles and watching young men and women die despite everything I could do, I wanted something simpler." Her voice remained professional, but her eyes revealed a depth of experience that made the colonel look away first. "I understand," Matthews said quietly. "But falsifying transfer documents—" "I didn't falsify anything, sir," Elena interrupted, her tone still respectful but firm. "I signed the papers that were put in front of me. If information was omitted, that was a decision made above my pay grade." Reed cleared his throat. "She's right. This came from higher up. Westmoreland called in favors to get her this assignment. He thought she deserved a break without having to formally retire." He turned to Elena. "He also said, and I quote, I knew she'd never stand by if people needed her skills, no matter what her papers said." Seems he was right. Rodriguez, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "Sir, whatever her official status, Chief Vasquez saved the lives of 2 of my men today. along with 10 civilians and allied personnel. She performed emergency medical procedures under direct fire that our regular medics couldn't handle. I believe her record should be officially recognized within this command." Colonel Matthews considered this, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. As of now, your correct rank and qualifications will be restored in our unit records, Chief Vasquez." He paused. "Unless you object?" Elena thought about the simplicity of being just another support staff member, the relative anonymity she had briefly enjoyed. Then she thought about Mills and the others she had treated today, how her skills had made the difference between life and death. "No objection, sir," she finally said. "But I'd prefer to continue working with the medical support unit rather than being assigned to direct combat operations." "Understood. You'll maintain your current billet, but with your proper rank and clearance restored." Matthews stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service, Chief, both the acknowledged and unacknowledged parts." As Elena left the command center, she found Parker waiting outside, his expression uncomfortable. The young medic had changed. Out of his blood-stained uniform, but still carried himself with the tension of someone who had just experienced combat for the first time. "Chief Vasquez," he said, testing out her proper rank. "I owe you an apology." Elena shook her head. "You followed your training. There's no fault in that." "My training didn't prepare me for what we faced today," Parker admitted, the admission clearly difficult for him. "I've been through every advanced course the Army offers for combat medicine, but," he trailed off, searching for words. "When everything went sideways, all that knowledge it wasn't enough." "It never is," Elena said simply. "That's why experience matters." Parker looked down at his hands, which still showed faint traces of blood despite scrubbing. "How do you do it? Stay so calm when everything's falling apart around you." Elena considered the question carefully. This wasn't about bragging rights or proving her superiority. This was a young medic trying to understand how to be better at keeping people alive. "The 10th time you perform emergency surgery during a firefight, it becomes easier than the first," she said. "Not because you care less, but because your hands remember what to do, even when your mind is processing the chaos." She gestured toward the medical tent. "Walk with me." They moved slowly through the base, Elena's injuries making her pace deliberate. Around them, the routine of military life continued, soldiers exercising, maintenance crews working on vehicles, the distant sound of a helicopter taking off. "The modern equipment, the advanced techniques you've learned, they're valuable," Elena continued. "But they're tools, not solutions. In the field, conditions are never ideal. Equipment fails, supplies run out, communications go down. So, how do you prepare for that?" Parker asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier defensiveness. "You learn to adapt, to improvise." Elena stopped, turning to face him directly. "The most important medical tool you have isn't in your kit. It's your ability to stay present when everything around you is telling you to panic." Parker nodded. "Slowly, I froze today. When Mills started crashing and the woman was bleeding out at the same time. I couldn't think clearly." "That's normal," Elena assured him. "Combat medicine isn't just about knowledge. It's about making impossible choices under the worst possible conditions, repeatedly, without letting each decision paralyze you." They reached the medical tent, where Dr. Chun was checking on the wounded Rangers. Through the open flap, Elena could see Mills sleeping on a cot, his condition stabilized but still serious. "The ghost medics," Parker said quietly. "Is it true what they say, that you operated behind enemy lines without support? That you treated both sides in the conflict?" Elena's expression remained neutral. "Most of what we did remains classified. But yes, there were times when we worked without conventional support. And we treated whoever needed treatment, enemy combatants, civilians, our own troops. In the middle of a mass casualty event, triage is about medical necessity, not uniform." Parker seemed to struggle with this concept. They taught us protocol for treating enemy wounded, but always after our own troops were stabilized. In theory, that works, Elena acknowledged. In practice, sometimes the enemy soldier is the one with information that could save your entire unit. Sometimes treating their wounded prevents retaliation against civilians. She shrugged slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandages. Medicine and combat have different objectives. As a combat medic, you live in the tension between them. Before Parker could respond, a commotion erupted from inside the medical tent. Dr. Chun's voice called out urgently, "He's crashing. Get the crash cart." Without hesitation, Elena moved into the tent. Parker closed behind. Mills was convulsing on the cot, his monitors showing dangerous arrhythmia. Dr. Chun and her staff moved with practiced efficiency, but Elena immediately spotted something they had missed. "It's not cardiac," she said, moving to Mills' side. "Look at his pupils." She pulled back an eyelid, revealing unevenly dilated pupils. Delayed traumatic brain injury. The bleeding started again. Dr. Chun quickly reassessed, confirming Elena's diagnosis. "We need to relieve the pressure immediately. Prep for emergency burr-hole procedure." The medical tent wasn't equipped for neurosurgery. As the staff scrambled to assemble what equipment they had, Elena noticed Mills' condition deteriorating. Rapidly. They had minutes, not the 20 it would take to prepare properly. "We don't have time," she said quietly to Dr. Chun. "By the time the equipment is ready, he'll have permanent brain damage." Dr. Chun looked torn. "The medevac to the hospital is at least 40 minutes out. We have to try something." Elena made a decision. "I've done this before. In Kandahar. With less equipment than we have here." The doctor hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Do it." From memory, Elena directed the assembly of makeshift neurosurgical tools. An orthopedic drill would serve instead of a proper cranial drill. Local anesthetic rather than general, since they needed Mills conscious to monitor his neurological status. Improvised pressure monitors using 4 tubing and a manometer. Parker watched in stunned silence as Elena prepared for a procedure he had only read about in advanced textbooks, never expecting to perform outside a proper surgical facility. Can I assist?" he finally asked. Elena nodded. "Wash up and get gloved. I'll walk you through it." As they worked together, Elena's instructions were clear, precise, and calm. She guided Parker's hands when necessary, encouraging him when he performed difficult steps correctly, correcting him gently when he hesitated. Throughout the procedure, she maintained a running commentary, explaining each step not just to Parker, but to the other medical staff watching. "The key is to work systematically, no matter what happens around you," she explained as she carefully relieved the pressure on Mills' brain. "Focus on what you can control, accept what you can't, and never stop moving forward." When the procedure was complete and Mills' condition had stabilized, Parker stepped back, his surgical gown stained with blood but his eyes bright with new understanding. I've never seen anything like that outside of a proper neurosurgical unit." Dr. Chun was equally impressed. "Where did you learn that technique? It's not in any field manual I've studied." Elena began cleaning up, her movements economical despite her own pain and fatigue. "From a neurosurgeon in Kandahar. He showed me how to modify the procedure for field conditions when we were trapped in a forward aid station during a 3-day siege. We performed it on 5 soldiers with similar injuries, using even less equipment than we had today." The doctor shook her head in amazement. "You should be teaching this. These techniques could save countless lives in remote locations." "Perhaps someday," Elena replied noncommittally. As they left the medical tent, the sun was setting over the jungle mountains, casting long shadows across the base. Parker walked silently beside Elena, processing everything he had witnessed. "Chief Vasquez," he finally said, his voice heavy with realization, I've been arrogant, haven't I? Thinking my training made me superior to someone with different qualifications. Elena stopped, turning to face the younger medic. Training is essential. It gives you the foundation, the starting point. But in combat medicine, the learning never stops. Each patient, each situation teaches you something new if you're willing to learn. Parker nodded slowly. I want to learn. From you, if you're willing to teach me. For the first time since they'd met, Elena smiled slightly. Meet me at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your medical kit. We'll start with how to improvise when your equipment fails. As Parker left, Elena made her way to the communications center. She needed to make a call, one she had been avoiding for months. Colonel Westmoreland answered on the second ring, his gruff voice immediately familiar. About time you called, Chief. Rodriguez filled me in. Sounds like you haven't lost your touch. Elena leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. You knew this would happen, didn't you? That's why you arranged this assignment. Westmoreland's chuckle crackled through the secure line. I knew who you are, Elena, no matter what paperwork says. You can't stop being who you are just because you change your title. I tried, she admitted quietly. I thought I could just be support staff. Let the younger medics handle the hard cases. And how did that work out for you? Elena thought about Mills, about the village, about Parker's newfound respect and eagerness to learn. It didn't. But I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to what I was doing before either. Who said anything about going back? Westmoreland asked. Sometimes moving forward means finding a new way to use old skills. He paused. The training division at Fort Sam Houston has been asking for someone with your experience. Someone who's actually performed these procedures in the field, not just read about them in manuals. Teaching? Elena hadn't considered that possibility. The next generation of combat medics could benefit from what you know, Chief. All those techniques that aren't in any manual, all those experiences that can't be simulated in training. You could save lives without ever setting foot on another battlefield. Elena watched as a group of young soldiers walked past, laughing and joking after completing their day's duties. So young, so much like the ones she had treated over the years, the ones she had saved and the ones she had lost. I'll think about it, she promised. After ending the call, Elena made her way slowly to her quarters. The events of the day had taken their toll, and her injuries throbbed with each step. But her mind was clearer than it had been in months. For the first time since her transfer, she felt a sense of purpose returning. Inside her Spartan room, she carefully unwrapped her medical kit and began the methodical process of cleaning and restocking each item. This ritual, performed countless times after missions, was as familiar to her as breathing. Each instrument checked, each medication verified, everything returned to its precise place in preparation for the next time it would be needed. Because there would be a next time. Whether in this jungle or somewhere else, whether in combat or in training others, her skills would be called upon again. And she would be ready. As she worked, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From her first deployment as a young, idealistic nurse to the classified operations that had shaped her into the medic she had become. The lessons learned, the lives saved, the losses that still haunted her quiet moments. She had tried to walk away from that identity, to become just another support staff member with a simplified service record. But today had proven what Colonel Westmoreland already knew. You couldn't erase experience with paperwork. You couldn't hide skills when lives depended on them. Elena Vasquez, Chief Warrant Officer, Combat Medic, Ghost Medic. The labels mattered less than the reality. She was who she was because of what she had seen and done, what she had learned in the hardest classrooms imaginable. Tomorrow she would begin sharing that knowledge with Parker. Perhaps that was the way forward, not denying her past, but using it to shape a better future for those who would follow in her footsteps. She finished repacking her kit and placed it by the door, ready for whatever the next day might bring. The next morning dawned hot and humid, typical for the Philippines in the rainy season. Elena was already at the designated meeting spot when Parker arrived. Exactly at 0600, the young medic carried his standard issue medical kit and looked both eager and nervous. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "Chief." He greeted her with a respectful nod. "Your regular kit?" Elena asked, pointing to his pack. "Yes, ma'am." "Standard issue for Ranger medics." Elena nodded. "Good. Today we're going to learn what to do when every item in that kit fails or runs out." She led him to a small clearing just outside the base perimeter, but still within the security zone. A makeshift training area had been set up, several bamboo poles forming a rough shelter, a collection of local plants laid out on a tarp, and what appeared to be animal parts in containers. Parker looked confused. "What is all this?" "Your new classroom," Elena replied. "In the field, especially behind enemy lines, resupply isn't an option. You use what's available or people die." She gestured to the collection of plants. "Local. Resources that can save lives when your fancy hemostatic agents run out." For the next 3 hours, Elena guided Parker through an intensive crash course in improvisational medicine. She showed him how certain local plants contained natural coagulants that could slow bleeding, how bamboo could be fashioned into emergency splints and breathing tubes, how coconut water could serve as a temporary fluid in extreme situations. "This can't be sterile," Parker objected when she demonstrated using coconut water for hydration when medical saline was unavailable. "It's not ideal," Elena agreed. "But I've seen soldiers die from dehydration waiting for proper supplies." "Sometimes. The choice isn't between perfect and good. It's between imperfect and dead." She tested his knowledge of anatomy by having him identify alternative pressure points when standard approaches failed. Using a pig's heart and blood vessels obtained from the base kitchen, she demonstrated suturing techniques using fishing line. When medical sutures ran out, "I've never seen these methods in any of our training," Parker admitted as he awkwardly attempted to replicate her precise stitching pattern. "Most of them aren't in manuals because they're not first-line treatments. They're last resorts when everything else has failed." Elena corrected his hand position. "Keep your wrist locked when you pull through. Steady pressure." By mid-morning, they had attracted an audience. Several other medics and even a few rangers had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the unusual training session with growing interest. Elena noticed but continued without acknowledging them. "The most important medical tool you have is right here," she tapped Parker's forehead. "Your ability to adapt, to see possibilities in whatever's available. Modern medicine gives us amazing tools, but historically, medics saved lives long before we had synthetic hemostatic agents or digital monitoring." As they took a water break, Captain Rodriguez approached. "Chief Vasquez, Commander Matthews would like to see you. Apparently, word of your training session here has traveled up the chain." Elena wiped her hands on a towel. "Am I in some kind of trouble, Captain?" Rodriguez shook his head. "Quite the opposite. But I'll let the Colonel explain." In the command center, Elena found not only Colonel Matthews but also several other officers she didn't recognize, including a full-bird colonel wearing medical corps insignia. "Chief Vasquez," Matthews greeted her. "This is Colonel Richardson from the Army Medical Department Center. He happened to be visiting our forward operating base for an inspection when he heard about yesterday's events." Colonel Richardson stepped forward, extending his hand. "Chief Warrant Officer Vasquez, your reputation precedes you, though until yesterday, I thought the stories were exaggerated." Elena shook his hand warily. "Sir, I've spent the morning reviewing the medical reports from yesterday's operation and speaking with Dr. Chun about the emergency neurosurgical procedure you performed." Richardson's expression was serious but impressed. That was remarkable work under the circumstances. Mills is being transported to our regional medical center, but the neurosurgeon there believes you saved not only his life but his cognitive function. Elena remained modest. I had excellent assistance from the medical team here. Yes, but they all credit you with both the diagnosis and the procedure. Richardson glanced at a tablet in his hand. I've also been speaking with your former commanding officer, Colonel Westmoreland. He tells me you've been involved in developing field techniques that aren't currently part of our standard combat medical training. Elena shifted uncomfortably. This felt like an interrogation, though she wasn't sure why. We adapted as necessary in the field, sir. When standard procedures weren't possible due to conditions or resource limitations. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. That's precisely why I'm here, Chief. The Army Medical Department is revising its advanced combat medical training. We're finding that our current protocols don't adequately prepare medics for the realities of prolonged field care in austere environments or behind enemy lines. Elena began to understand where this was heading. Sir, with respect, I'm not a teacher. I'm a field medic. From what I observed this morning, you're both, Matthews interjected. Parker has been with us for 18 months. In 3 hours with you, he learned more practical field medicine than in all his formal training combined. Colonel Richardson set down his tablet. We'd like you to help develop a new training module for advanced combat medicine, specifically focusing on improvised techniques when standard equipment fails or runs out. The kind of medicine you practiced with your unofficial unit. Elena was silent for a moment, processing the request. She thought about Parker's eagerness to learn, about Mills and the others she had saved yesterday, about the countless young medics being deployed with excellent training for ideal conditions but little preparation for when everything went wrong. For how long? She finally asked. Initially, a 3-week assignment at Fort Sam Houston to help develop the curriculum. After that, we could discuss a more permanent position if you're interested. Richardson leaned forward. This could save lives, Chief. Not just the ones you personally treat, but hundreds or thousands more through the medics you train. Elena thought about Westmoreland's words from yesterday. Moving forward, not back, using old skills in new ways. When would this start? We can have orders cut by tomorrow, Matthews answered. You'd fly out with Colonel Richardson when he leaves next week. Elena nodded slowly. I'll do it. But I have conditions. Richardson raised an eyebrow. Which are? I need full autonomy over the curriculum development. No watering down techniques because they don't fit with conventional approaches. Elena's voice was firm. And I want to bring Lieutenant Parker as my assistant instructor. He's experienced enough to understand conventional methods, but open-minded enough to learn new approaches. The colonels exchanged glances. That can be arranged, Richardson agreed. Anything else? Elena thought for a moment. I want access to talk to the wounded from yesterday's operation during their recovery. Their experiences should inform the training we develop. Done, Richardson said, extending his hand again. Welcome to the faculty, Chief Vasquez. As Elena left the command center, she found Parker waiting anxiously outside. What happened? Am I in trouble for participating in unauthorized training? Elena shook her head. How do you feel about a temporary assignment to Fort Sam Houston? Parker's eyes widened. The medical training center? Why would they want me there? Not just you, us. Elena explained the proposal as they walked back toward the medical tents. You'd be my assistant instructor. Help develop training for the next generation of combat medics. Parker stopped walking, staring at her in disbelief. Me? I froze. Yesterday, I failed when it mattered most. Elena turned to face him directly. And that makes you the perfect person to help develop this training. You understand both sides now, the theory and the reality. You know where the gaps are between what's taught and what's needed. I don't know, Chief. Parker looked doubtful. Teaching others when I just learned how much I don't know myself. The best teachers are often those still actively learning. Elena replied. Besides, your recent experience with standard training will help ensure what we develop actually addresses the real gaps. Before Parker could respond further, urgent shouting came from the direction of the base entrance. They turned to see a local truck speeding toward the gate, horn blaring continuously. Even from a distance, Elena could see the vehicle was packed, with people, many appearing injured. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the commotion, Parker close behind. By the time they reached the gate, security personnel had allowed the truck through and medical staff were already responding. The back of the vehicle lay at least 8 civilians with various injuries, including several children. A local man, presumably the driver, was frantically trying to explain in broken English. Bomb in village, many hurt. These ones we bring first. Dr. Chun was already triaging the wounded, barking orders to her staff. Set up the trauma bay. I need 2 surgical teams ready now. Elena quickly assessed the situation, then turned to Parker. Time to apply what we just learned. These injuries are hours old. They drove a long way to reach us. For the next several hours, Elena and Parker worked alongside the base medical staff, treating blast injuries ranging from minor shrapnel wounds to life-threatening trauma. The regular medical supplies began running low as patient after patient arrived, first by truck, then by military vehicles sent to retrieve more wounded. When the standard suture kits ran out, Elena seamlessly switched to the improvisational techniques she had just taught Parker that morning. When blood products became critically low, she implemented a battlefield blood transfusion protocol that many of the staff had never seen before, using pre-screened soldiers as walking blood banks. In the midst of treating a young girl with severe burns, Elena noticed Parker working independently across the room. He was calmly instructing 2 junior medics on how to create an improvised chest seal using materials from the kitchen when the medical-grade supplies were exhausted. His hands moved with new confidence, his instructions clear and precise. By evening, they had treated over 30 wounded civilians from the bombing. Despite the severity of many injuries and the limited resources, they lost only 1 patient, an elderly man who had arrived with already fatal injuries. As the crisis finally subsided, Dr. Chun approached Elena, exhaustion evident in her face but admiration in her eyes. That blood transfusion protocol you implemented saved at least 5 lives today. Where did you learn that? Kandahar, 2010. Elena replied, massaging her cramping hands. We were cut off from supplies for 8 days after our base was surrounded. Had to improvise or watch patients die. Chun shook her head in amazement. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years, and I saw techniques today I didn't know existed. She glanced over at Parker, who was showing another medic how to properly secure an improvised splint. And your student seems to have learned quickly. Elena followed her gaze, a small smile forming. He has good instincts. Just needed to trust them more than his textbooks. Later that night, Elena sat alone outside her quarters, staring up at the stars. The day's events played through her mind, not just the emergency response, but the offer from Colonel Richardson, the possibility of shaping how future combat medics would be trained. She heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Parker, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her silently, then sat down nearby. Couldn't sleep? She asked. He shook his head. Keep seeing their faces, the wounded, the ones we saved. Better than seeing the faces of those you couldn't save, Elena replied softly. Those are the ones that stay with you longest. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping the strong military coffee. I want to accept the assignment, Parker finally said, to Fort Sam Houston. I want to help develop the training program, Elena nodded. Good. They'll cut our orders tomorrow. That little girl with the burns. Parker continued. The technique you used with the honey and banana leaves. I've never seen burns calm down that quickly without pharmaceutical intervention. Local medicine, Elena explained. Learned it from a village healer in Afghanistan. Sometimes ancient. Wisdom works better than modern pharmaceuticals, especially in austere environments. Parker was quiet again for a moment. All these years, I thought being a good medic meant memorizing protocols and mastering equipment. But today, when all that ran out, I realized it's really about. He struggled to find the words. Presence, Elena supplied. Being fully present with the wounded, using whatever you have at hand, and never giving up no matter how impossible it seems. Yes. Parker looked relieved that she understood. How do you teach that? Elena considered the question seriously. Not through lectures or textbooks, through shared experience. Through stories that carry hard-earned wisdom. Through hands-on training that pushes beyond comfort zones. She took another sip of coffee. That's what we'll build at Fort Sam Houston. Not just another technical course, but something that prepares medics for the reality of medicine when everything goes wrong. A week later, Elena stood on the tarmac as their transport plane prepared for departure. Around her, the base had gathered for an informal send-off. Among them were several of the civilians they had treated, including the young girl with burns, her hand wrapped in clean bandages. Smiling shyly at Elena, Colonel Matthews approached, extending his hand. The medical staff has been implementing your techniques all week. Dr. Chun is already insisting we document everything for wider distribution. Elena shook his hand. Good. Medicine shouldn't be hoarded or classified. If it saves lives, everyone should know it. Rodriguez appeared next, accompanied by several Rangers from the unit that had initially dismissed her. Chief Vasquez, he said formally, then broke into a rare smile. The men wanted to say goodbye properly. One by one, the Rangers shook. Her hand, each expressing gratitude not just for the lives she had saved, but for the knowledge she had shared. Last in line was Mills, still pale and moving slowly, but alive and coherent against all odds. They tell me I should have died twice, he said quietly. Once in the village and once here at base. Both times you refused to let that happen. He straightened to attention despite his weakness and offered a formal salute. Thank you, Chief, for everything. Elena returned the salute with equal formality. Just doing my job, Sergeant. As she boarded the plane with Parker and Colonel Richardson, Elena felt a strange mixture of emotions. For so long, her identity had been wrapped up in being the medic who went where others couldn't or wouldn't go. The one who operated in shadows, whose work remained largely unacknowledged in official records. Now she was stepping into the light, tasked with sharing what she had learned through years of classified operations and improvised battlefield medicine. Nervous? Parker asked as they buckled in for takeoff. Elena considered the question. Not nervous, just adjusting. I've spent most of my career being told to keep quiet about what I did and how I did it. Now they want me to write it all down and teach it. Richardson, overhearing, leaned across the aisle. That's precisely why you're the right person for this, Chief. You've been operating without recognition because the mission mattered more than the credit. That's the kind of leadership we need in our training programs. As the plane lifted off, Elena watched the jungle base grow smaller below them. She thought about all the places her career had taken her, the combat zones, the classified missions, the makeshift field hospitals in impossible conditions. Each had taught her something valuable, lessons written in blood and pain and occasional triumph. Now those lessons would live on through others, through Parker and the countless medics who would train under the program they would develop. Her experiences would save lives she would never see, in conflicts she would never join, through the hands of medics she would never meet. Perhaps that was the greatest contribution she could make. Not just saving lives directly, but multiplying her impact through others who carried her knowledge forward. The plane banked toward home, leaving the jungle behind. Elena closed her eyes, feeling not the end of a chapter, but the beginning of something new. Something that honored all she had been through by transforming it into something that would endure beyond her own service. "Chief," Parker's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I've been thinking about how to structure the training modules. What if we organize them around scenarios rather than equipment? Start with the situation, then work backward to the improvisational techniques?" Elena opened her eyes, a small smile forming. Already, he was thinking like an instructor, finding ways to make the knowledge accessible and practical. "That's exactly right," she agreed. "Because in the field, you never get to choose your scenario. You have to adapt to whatever comes your way." As the plane carried them toward their new assignment, Elena felt a sense of purpose stronger than she had experienced in years. The ghost medic was stepping out of the shadows, bringing with her the accumulated wisdom of countless battlefield innovations and last-resort techniques that had never been formally documented. It wasn't the path she had expected when she'd requested that quiet transfer to support staff, but perhaps it was the path she had been preparing for all along, through every impossible situation she had faced and overcome. The wounds on her back still ached from the recent mission, joining the constellation of scars that marked her body like a map of her service. Each told a story of lives saved under impossible conditions. Now those stories would serve a greater purpose, preparing a new generation of medics to face whatever challenges awaited them with the same resourcefulness, courage, and unwavering commitment to their patients. That, she realized, was a mission worthy of everything she had to give. 3 months later, Elena stood at the front of a classroom at Fort Sam Houston, surveying the faces of 24 combat medics selected for the first iteration of the Advanced Austere Medicine program. The room hummed with nervous energy. These weren't inexperienced trainees but seasoned medical professionals, many with multiple combat deployments under their belts. "My name is Chief Warrant Officer Elena Vasquez," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room without needing to raise it. "For the next 6 weeks, I'll be challenging everything you think you know about combat medicine." She paced slowly across the front of the classroom, making eye contact with each student. "You've all mastered conventional techniques. You can recite protocols in your sleep. You've earned certifications and commendations." She paused. "None of that matters when you're 50 miles behind enemy lines with a casualty bleeding out, and your last hemostatic dressing was used an hour ago." From the back of the room, Parker observed silently. In the 3 months since their arrival, he had watched Elena transform from a reluctant instructor to the driving force behind a program that was already generating buzz throughout military medical circles. The curriculum they had developed together combined rigorous scientific principles with hard-earned field innovations that had never before been formally taught. "This course isn't about what to do when everything goes according to plan," Elena continued. "It's about what to do when nothing does. When your equipment fails, when your supplies run out, when evacuation is impossible, and all you have are your hands, your mind, and whatever you can find around you." She gestured to the walls where photographs depicted various austere environments: desert, jungle, Arctic, urban ruins. "In each of these scenarios, I've had to perform life-saving medicine with severely limited resources. By the end of this course, you'll be able to do the same." A hand raised from the middle of the room. A captain with combat medic tabs and the insignia of the 101st Airborne Division. "Chief, with respect, we've all had training in field expedient techniques. How is this different?" Elena smiled slightly. "Captain, what would you do if you needed to establish an airway in a patient with severe facial trauma? Your standard intubation equipment was destroyed, and evacuation was 12 hours away. Cricothyroidotomy with whatever sharp implement is available," he answered confidently. "And if the patient also has a neck injury that makes that impossible?" The captain hesitated. I'm not sure there's a protocol for that scenario." Elena nodded. There isn't. But there is a solution. One that I've successfully implemented twice in combat situations. She turned to address the entire class. Again, this course isn't about protocols. It's about principles that allow you to innovate when protocols fail. It's about developing the mindset that refuses to accept defeat, even when conventional wisdom says a patient can't be saved. For the next hour, Elena outlined the structure of the course, a combination of classroom instruction, hands-on labs, and eventually, immersive scenario training in environments designed to replicate the stress and resource limitations of real combat situations. Throughout her presentation, she noticed the students' expressions shifting from skepticism to growing interest. After dismissing the class for the day, Elena found Colonel Richardson waiting in the hallway. "Impressive first session, Chief," he said. "You've got them hooked." Elena shrugged. "They're still not convinced. Talk is easy. They need to see these techniques work when everything else fails." Richardson nodded. "That's why tomorrow's demonstration is so important. Half the medical command brass will be there, including General Martinez." The mention of the Surgeon General of the Army made Elena tense slightly. The general had initially opposed the program, arguing that teaching improvised techniques might encourage medics to deviate from established protocols unnecessarily. "I'll be ready," she assured him. Later that evening, Elena sat in her temporary office, reviewing materials for the next day's demonstration. Parker entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Just like old times," he said, placing 1 cup on her desk, except with better coffee and fewer bullets flying overhead. Elena accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Sometimes I miss the bullets. At least then I knew where I stood." Parker settled into a chair across from her. "The students are talking about you. Word spreading through the base about the ghost medic, teaching unconventional techniques." "I wish they'd stop using that nickname," Elena muttered. "Too late. It's becoming legendary." Parker leaned forward. "Are you ready for tomorrow? General Martinez is bringing his entire staff." Elena took a long sip of coffee. "They want a show. I'm not here to perform tricks." "No, but you are here to convince them this program deserves permanent funding and official integration into the combat medical curriculum." Parker had become increasingly adept at navigating the political aspects of their position. "Martinez needs to see something that makes him a believer." Elena considered this. "What we're teaching isn't flashy. It's gritty, desperate medicine for when everything else has failed." "Then that's what we show them," Parker replied simply. "The reality of medicine at the edge of impossible." The next morning, Elena arrived at the demonstration area, a large simulation room configured to replicate a bombed-out building in an urban environment. Ambient sounds played over speakers. Distant explosions, sporadic gunfire, occasional radio chatter. The lighting was dim, with emergency generator effects causing intermittent flickering. In the observation area, a collection of high-ranking officers and medical officials had gathered, including General Martinez, a stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair and the bearing of someone who had started as a combat surgeon before rising through the ranks. Colonel Richardson made brief introductions that explained the scenario. Chief Vasquez will demonstrate advanced techniques for managing catastrophic trauma in an environment where standard equipment is unavailable and evacuation is not possible for at least 12 hours. Elena stepped forward, dressed not in a classroom uniform but in weathered combat fatigues similar to what she had worn in the field. "General, distinguished guests, what you're about to see isn't theoretical. Every technique I demonstrate has been performed successfully in combat situations, when conventional approaches were impossible." She gestured to the simulation room. The scenario: a building collapse following an IED detonation. Multiple casualties, medical supplies mostly destroyed in the blast. No possibility of evacuation or resupply due to active enemy presence in the area. With that introduction, Elena entered the simulation room. where Parker and two other instructors waited with highly realistic medical training mannequins. These advanced simulators could be programmed to display various vital signs, respond to interventions, and mimic actual physiological responses. For the next 45 minutes, Elena demonstrated a series of techniques that had the observers leaning forward in their seats. She created an improvised positive pressure ventilation system using water bottles and tubing scavenged from the rubble. She fashioned splints from debris and fabric torn from clothing. Most dramatically, she performed an emergency transfusion protocol using Parker as a simulated walking blood bank when the casualty experienced catastrophic hemorrhage. Throughout the demonstration, she narrated each decision, explaining not just the how but the why behind each improvised technique. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, never hesitating despite the challenging conditions. When she finally emerged from the simulation room, there was a moment of silence before General Martinez stood up. "Chief Vasquez," he said, his voice neutral, "that transfusion protocol you demonstrated isn't approved in our current field manuals." Elena met his gaze steadily. "No, sir, it isn't. But it has saved 16 lives that I personally know of, when approved protocols weren't possible due to resource limitations." And the airway management technique using the water bottle? Developed during an operation in northern Afghanistan when our medical equipment was destroyed in an ambush. We saved 4 soldiers with that technique who would have suffocated before evacuation arrived. The general was silent for a moment, studying her. "You understand my concern, Chief. We have established protocols based on extensive research and testing. What you're proposing is teaching medics to essentially improvise critical care." Elena took a deep breath. This was the moment to make her case, not just for her program, but for all the future lives that might depend on these techniques. "With respect, General, combat medics already improvise when circumstances force them to. The difference is whether they do so with guided principles based on battlefield-tested techniques, or whether they're left to figure it out alone in the moment when lives hang in the balance." She gestured toward the simulation room. "Every technique I just demonstrated was born of necessity in combat when approved protocols couldn't be implemented due to circumstances beyond anyone's control. We're not teaching these methods as replacements for standard care, but as last resort options when standard care is impossible." General Martinez considered this. "And you've documented the outcomes of these improvised interventions?" "As thoroughly as combat conditions allowed, sir. Colonel Richardson has the complete data from my deployments, including follow-up on patients who received these interventions." The general turned to Richardson, who nodded confirmation. "The survival rates are remarkable, considering the circumstances, General. In many cases, these were patients who, according to conventional wisdom, should not have survived at all." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Why wasn't this knowledge shared earlier, Chief Vasquez?" It was a fair question, but one that touched on the complicated reality of Elena's service. "Much of my work was classified, sir. The operations themselves remain so, but Colonel Westmoreland and others advocated for declassifying the medical techniques so they could be more widely taught." The general nodded slowly. "I've known Westmoreland for 20 years. If he vouches for these methods, that carries significant weight." He looked around at the other observers, then back to Elena. "I'd like to see one more demonstration, if you don't mind. Something that directly compares your technique to our current protocol in a scenario where both could theoretically be attempted." Elena nodded. "Of course, sir." For the second demonstration, Parker joined Elena in the simulation room. 2 identical mannequins were prepared with the same severe injury, a complex limb trauma with arterial bleeding that standard tourniquets couldn't adequately control due to the location near the joint. Parker demonstrated the current protocol, applying the latest hemostatic agents and pressure dressings according to the field manual. Elena demonstrated her technique using materials that would be commonly available even if medical supplies were exhausted. A specific pressure point approach combined with an improvised compression system using rigid materials and cloth in a precise configuration. When both had finished, the mannequin's vital signs told the story clearly. Both approaches had controlled the bleeding, but Elena's patient showed better perfusion to the distal limb, reducing the risk of long-term tissue damage or potential amputation. General Martinez and his staff observed the vital sign monitors closely, then conferred among themselves in low voices. Finally, the general approached Elena directly. "Chief Vasquez, I've spent my career advocating for evidence-based medicine and standardized protocols," he began, his tone formal but no longer adversarial. "But I'm also a pragmatist who began as a battlefield surgeon. I recognize the value of what you're demonstrating here." He extended his hand. "You have my provisional approval for this program. Document everything thoroughly, track outcomes rigorously, and report directly to my office on progress. If the results continue to support your methods, we'll integrate this training into the standard combat medical curriculum." Elena shook his hand, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, sir. We won't let you down." As the observers filed out, Parker approached with barely contained excitement. "We did it." Full approval from the Surgeon General himself. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Provisional approval. The real work is just beginning. Over. The next 6 weeks, Elena pushed her students to their limits and beyond. The course progressed from classroom instruction to increasingly challenging hands-on scenarios. They trained in simulated environments ranging from Arctic conditions in cold chambers to desert heat in environmental simulators. They practiced medicine in darkness, under simulated enemy fire, while physically exhausted and with dwindling supplies. With each scenario, Elena forced them to think beyond their training, to innovate when standard approaches failed, to find solutions where none seemed possible. She was demanding but fair, pushing hardest those who showed the most potential. One student in particular, Captain Maya Rodriguez, reminded Elena of herself, resourceful, determined, with an intuitive understanding of how to adapt medical principles to impossible situations. During one particularly challenging night exercise, Rodriguez successfully improvised a chest tube, using materials scavenged from an abandoned vehicle when the standard equipment had been deliberately destroyed as part of the scenario. "Where did you learn that technique?" Elena asked afterward. "It's not one I taught." Rodriguez looked momentarily worried. "I adapted it from what you showed us last week with the bottle drainage system. Was that wrong?" Elena smiled, a rare enough occurrence that several nearby students noticed. "No, Captain. That was exactly right. You didn't just memorize a technique, you understood the principle behind it and adapted it to a new situation. That's what this course is really about." By the final week, Elena's students had transformed. Gone was the rigid adherence to protocols. Above all else, in its place was a flexible, resourceful approach to combat medicine that honored established procedures, but wasn't limited by them when circumstances demanded innovation. On the last day of training, Elena gathered the class for a final address. 24 faces looked back at her, tired but confident, changed by what they had learned and experienced together. "When you return to your units," she told them, "you'll be taking with you knowledge that has never before been formally taught in military medicine. Knowledge that has saved lives when everything else failed. Knowledge that comes with great responsibility." She paced slowly before them, making eye contact with each student. "Your primary protocols haven't changed. You'll still use standard equipment and procedures whenever possible. But now you have options when the impossible happens. Now you have the skills to keep fighting for your patients when circumstances say you should give up." Elena stopped pacing, standing still before them. Being a combat medic isn't just about technical skills, or medical knowledge. It's about refusing to accept defeat, about finding a way forward when all paths seem blocked. It's about the sacred promise we make to those under our care, that we will do everything humanly possible to bring them home. Each of you came here already an excellent medic, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. You're leaving as something more, someone who can function at the edge of what's possible, who can innovate when innovation is the only option left, who understands that sometimes the difference between life and death isn't found in a manual, but in the unwavering determination to find a solution, no matter what. As the graduates filed out, many stopped to thank Elena personally. Some shared stories of patience they now believed they could have saved with these techniques. Others simply expressed gratitude for a new perspective on what was possible in battlefield medicine. Captain Rodriguez was the last to approach. Chief Vasquez, I've been offered a position as an instructor when this program expands next quarter. They want me to assist with developing the advanced scenarios. Elena nodded approvingly. You'll be excellent. You understand the core principle, that medicine isn't about following steps but about achieving outcomes, by whatever means necessary when lives are at stake. After the graduates had gone, Parker joined Elena as she gathered her materials. So what's next? The general has already approved expanding the program to 3 concurrent classes based on the evaluations. Elena closed her teaching binder. Thoughtfully, I've been thinking about that. This is just the beginning. These techniques need to reach more than just a handful of elite medics. They need to be available to anyone who might find themselves as the only medical provider in an austere environment. What are you suggesting? A field guide. Something compact that can be carried anywhere, waterproof, with clear illustrations. The essential principles and techniques distilled to their core elements. Elena's eyes lit with purpose. Something that could save lives even in the hands of someone with basic medical training when professional help isn't available. Parker nodded slowly. Like a modern version of the old Special Forces medical handbook, but updated with your techniques. Exactly. Elena gathered the last of her materials. We start tomorrow. This class was just 24 medics. A field guide could reach thousands. As they walked out of the classroom together, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From battlefield nurse to ghost medic to instructor shaping the future of combat medicine. Her techniques, born of desperate necessity in the darkest moments of combat, would now live on through others, saving lives she would never see, in places she would never go. It wasn't the path she had imagined when she'd tried to walk away from her past, to become just a nurse again. But perhaps it was the path she had been preparing for all along, transforming hard-earned wisdom into a legacy that would endure beyond her own service. Outside, the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. A group of medical students passed by, their conversation animated as they discussed treatment approaches. On the nearby parade ground, a flag detail was lowering the colors for the day, the familiar ceremony a reminder of the traditions that bound them all together in service. Elena paused, watching the flag as it was carefully folded. She thought about all the places that flag had gone with her, all the battles fought, all the lives saved and lost, all the lessons learned at terrible cost. Now those lessons would serve a greater purpose, preparing a new generation for challenges yet to come. They had called her just a nurse once, dismissing her capabilities based on a title in her transfer papers. But titles had never defined Elena Vasquez. What defined her was an unwavering commitment to saving lives by any means necessary, an innovative spirit that refused to accept defeat, and the courage to act when others hesitated. Those qualities couldn't be captured in a rank or position. Title. They lived in her actions, in the lives she had saved, and now in the knowledge she passed on to others who would carry it forward. As the flag was secured for the night, Elena turned toward the future with renewed purpose. Her work was far from finished. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.